okay, but that's your career and this is your family and that's your social life. But they're all Venn diagrammed, right?
Yep.
If if I'm burnout at work and then the only thing I'm doing is hanging out with gossipy people and drinking, of course I'm not rested and gonna handle my job well.
Welcome to the Fearless Happiness Podcast, where we showcase phenomenal individuals who have overcome serious traumas, life obstacles, and challenges to find their own path to fearless happiness. Listen as Max Naist invites guests from all around the world to share their experiences and spread strength, hope, and faith. This is the Fearless Happiness Podcast, and this is Max Naist.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. This is Max from the Fearless Happiness Podcast, coming to you with a new guest, an amazing guest who's about to tell her story. And thankfully, this happened when it did, because if it was any earlier, there'd probably be no podcast because I could barely breathe and hold a conversation without coughing. And Allison would be like, I'm out. But anyway, we're going to have fun. So Allison, what I like to do is have you introduce yourself to my audience, who you are, what it is you do, and then we're going to rock and roll.
Yeah. So my name is Allison. I'm based outside of New York, and I have a few roles that I do. I'm a therapist, and no surprise here, I'm also a coach, right? As kind of like we all are these days.
I
I
love it.
And I also do speaking events. But, I specialize in, confidence, sex and intimacy, and anxiety. And I work with a lot of people who overcome trauma. So that's like kind of my main specialties. But I have a strange background where I spent a lot of my career actually in like the criminal justice system. So I worked for Rikers Island, working with all men in solitary confinement. I worked for an ACT team, providing therapy services to people who were offered, services instead of jail time, and got them connected to all the things we need in life. So, though I'm a therapist, I was a private investigator before I did this.
Wow.
So I'm a private investigator turned therapist / coach.
I love it. So you hear that, everybody? She was a private investigator. So if you say anything funky, she's going to come after you guys. And I'm kidding. But Allison, so like you understand, because you're a therapist and stuff, right? Most of us who are in the helping biz, right? We have gone through stuff ourselves. So what I like to do is kind of go back, and you go as deep as you want, but tell my audience like those challenges you went through that helped shape the person you are today and, pushed you into the career that you're doing now.
Yeah. So, I think you're right. Anybody who's sort of in the healing field has had some sort of life experience that has drawn them to helping others. And mine was, it's not the craziest of stories, but when I was in high school, I had a lot of anxiety. So for context, I'm 43, right? Was raised in the 80s and the 90s. And, at the time, there really wasn't a lot of resources, support, education around anxiety. So I was just like what you would think of as a nervous kid. And I was, popular. I had friends. Had a big social life. And I think the fact that it wasn't so disabling that like I needed obvious attention, almost let me pass through, right? But my mental health wasn't great. And, I often tell the story that when I was 15, I had gotten into a big fight with my boyfriend, as you do when you're 15. And I had what I didn't know then, and I know now, my first panic attack. And it landed me in the ER, right? I thought I was having a heart attack. The ambulance came. And I think back to that memory, and like I went to the hospital and they were like, you had an anxiety attack. Okay, goodbye. Right. And like that was the end of that story. Like I wasn't prescribed medication, I wasn't hooked up to services. And the thing that I remembered the most is I was deeply shamed by that. Right. Like I was like, Mom, do not tell my friends I ended up in the hospital. Please don't tell them that I had an anxiety attack.
Right.
And I felt really broken, So that's I think started to shape my interest in psychology. But I was very, very interested also in in sex crimes, in sexual assaults, and in sexual violence. So when I went to college, I specialized in psychology and forensics, right? Which is kind of like why I've bounced back between private investigator and therapist. So though it doesn't necessarily birth out of my own personal story, you know, a lot of what has shaped my career now is just I worked in an emergency room. Like I said, I worked in Rikers Island. And I think the challenges that have also shaped where I am today is not so much like the story of I've had a personal trauma, but I went into this field because I was really invested in helping particularly women survive sexual assault, come back from that, heal from trauma. And somehow or another, I landed myself a job doing private investigating, which was kind of adjacent to what I wanted to do, right? Like I worked for a big corporation, I was involved in forensics, but I was in my mid 30s when I kind of pulled back, bird's eye view, looked at my life and realized I really hated my job. I hated my career. I wasn't really doing anything that fueled my passion, right? I was hustling nonstop. I was working really effing hard. And I had like the cliche breakdown, right? And burnt out. And so in my mid 30s, I decided to just go right back to the drawing board and start all over again. So, you know, I remembered all the volunteer work, all the internships that I had working in sexual violence, working in the forensic system. And so I went back for a second master's degree in when I was 35 and reshaped my entire life because of it. So I, you know, had to go back to a free internship. I had to take a second survival job bartending, which was an old pastime of mine. But the reason I share that is because so many of the clients that I work with, you know, often say that they're stuck. And I think we don't give a lot of, I don't know, support, encouragement to the idea that you are allowed to pivot your life, right? If it, like things are not working, if you don't like your job, if you don't like your relationship, if you don't like where you live, it is terrifying to have to start over, but it's also really transformative, right? And so, you know, part of my, at least public speaking is sharing that, like, listen, it was hard, but I think staying in a job that I hated would have been harder. Like it was soul sucking, you know?
Right. You know, I'm glad you said that, right? Because I mean, I'm of the belief now, and as I get older, right, that if you want to do something, it's okay, right?
Yeah.
Do your homework. And if it's something you really, you know, lights your fire, gets you up in the morning, why not? I don't care if, like you said, 30s, 40s, or 50s, right? And I've seen people in their 60s and 70s go back to school because, you know, they want to go back to school and get their master's or their PhD and help people or whatever the case, right? And I don't know about you, but like my generation, I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, right? I'm going to be 57 in March. Anyway, but you know, the generation before us were like that though, right? Like you get a job, you work 9 to 5 and you stay with that company and retire so you can, you know, take care of your family. And pretty much you know, it doesn't matter if you like it or not. This is what you have to do. And luckily my mom, I mean, she did that, right? She worked because she took care of us kids but she always said, like, if you want to do something, then go to school or, you know, but her thing is work hard. Don't just, she hated if you half-ass things. Like it drove her crazy. And I find that, right? Like even I find that I'm being my parents, right? Like around the yard and stuff. Like if it's not the way I like it, it's like, oh my God, nobody can do this. I got to do it myself. I'll start from scratch. I'll throw your stuff away, right? Like my mom did if you left it laying around. Anyway, so back to, right, like, and that chosen path, you know, what you've done, that can be taxing, right? Working with victims of sexual assault. Like we hear the things in the news, you know, and you know, you heard it, you worked in a facility that's pretty brutal, right? Rikers Island is pretty tough, you know, facility. And to see that stuff, let me ask you, so how have you been able to stay focused and not let that burn you out? Because, right, I mean, it's bad enough when it's adults, and then you come across when it's children. As a grandfather, like I can't even imagine what I would do if someone hurt my granddaughters or my grandsons. And you know what I mean? And as a father, my own kids.
What I've learned over the years, I think, is that like it sounds cliche, right? Like I don't know how to say this without it sounding like a cheesy throwaway cliche lesson, but I find it true that when we align with our passion, we actually burn out less, right?
Right.
So I work arguably more, right, in a very high stress environment. Was working those hours, and I was less burnt out than doing less work at a job I hated. So, I think the fact that I feel very strongly about the work I do helps the burnout.
Right.
But in any type of a job where it's like that intense, it again sounds cliche, but you need a lot of self-care. And what I joke with clients is like self-care is not bath bombs, it's not pedicures, right? It's like finding a job that I actually left. I'll backtrack. I left Rikers. And the reason I left the Rikers is because in my contract, they were unwilling to give me a certain amount of time off that I really knew I needed. And I know for me, I was not able to sustain that type of a career without the balance of being able to walk away. Right. And so ultimately I moved, I pivoted again. Same career, but just chose a different facility.
Right.
And, that helps with burnout, right? Like, again, back to feeling stuck. I think sometimes when we get opportunities, we think they're the only opportunities. And so I, had to remind myself I was a good clinician. I worked in one of the most notorious jails in the world, arguably, right? I can find another job. This isn't my only opportunity. If this isn't in alignment for what I need to keep my mental sanity, I'm not going to show up well to anybody. I'm certainly not showing well up to them, but I have a responsibility to my life too. I have a partner. I now have a 3-month-old, right? So, I think again, the question of like, how do we avoid burnout, whether it's in an intense, I'm a sexual trauma counselor, or you're just a kindergarten teacher, or you're a stay-at-home mom, or you're insert whatever identity here.
Right.
It's just like checking what you actually need and finding things that align to it. And that is hard, right?
Right.
It's hard.
And I love that you said that, right? Because thank God I've had like mentors and, in my recovery, my sponsor who always said, you got to take time for yourself because you can only give so much before you break. And you're like, right. And he saw me go through 4 relapses and he's like, we don't want that again. Right. So I've learned. And like you, it's a big reason knowing that self-care and what I need to do for myself that I've lasted in the substance abuse field for so long, for almost 16 years now, right? Where I've seen people burn out after a year or two because
tough job.
Like you, we're hearing all the hard stuff that people have gone through or have been abused. And, they see you like as someone they can trust. So they're going to let it out. And you're just, and day after day after day of hearing that, as can be taxing.
Absolutely.
But you're correct, right? As long as you have like a routine, like I say, your daily routine of working out, making sure you're taking care, not of just your physical health, but your mental health, right? For me, it's prayer and meditation. And then like you probably understand is surrounding yourself with the right people that support you, but also will say, hey, Allison, I see you going down this rabbit hole. We need to pull you out. You need to stop what you're doing and take a look at what's going on. Right. And
my God, yeah.
Right. And like you said, the partner, whatever, your friends are very important in that aspect, right? Because you want people you trust to be able to call you on your BS. I'm fine. I can work 16-hour days, keep going. Nope. So everybody, Allison's like, nope, that ain't gonna happen. But being self-aware, especially in your field, my field, or anything that's where we're helping people, like our first responders, right? Yeah. And I'm sure you've heard the horror stories of first responders not taking care of themselves, just whether it's an officer, a firefighter, military, and I think it is a lot to blame on the older, and I don't mean it in a bad way, but that grind and hustle and grind, don't stop until you're done, like, right? You don't sleep until you die kind of attitude, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's why I bring guests like yourself on the show so that people can see like Allison's a human being, right? She may be a badass and she's out there helping people, but she's also human that takes care of her partner and her child and herself and the people around her, right? Because like you said, if we're burnt out, we're no good to anybody around us.
No, and you made such a really, really good point. So I also became alcohol free, and I'm fortunate it never got to a rock bottom moment. It never got to even like a big addiction moment. I was not living my best life. And when I stopped drinking, it was really hard for me because I realized that I had been either filling my life with like bar culture and work, right? Like worked, went to happy hour, worked. So 9 to 5, not even 9 to 5, many hours. And then like finally the weekend and I get to go out. And nothing I was doing was restorative, right? And so when I quit drinking, one, I had to ask myself, like, okay, well, if I'm not drinking, what am I doing? Right. And I had a coach at the time, an alcohol coach, and she was like, well, what do you like to do? And it occurred to me that I actually didn't know the answer to that question, right? Like I had stopped having hobbies, like kind of going out to the bars was my hobby. And I started to reconnect to, she gave me value advice, which was like, think about when you were a kid, what lit you up, right? Go back to that.
Right.
And the two things that came up for me were swimming and dancing. I love to swim and I love to dance. And, I have a much different body than I did in my 20s. Right. So I was like, all right, I'm not becoming a professional ballerina anymore. But I joined a dancing studio, right? And I met community there. I started to feel more confident. And the other light bulb that went off was the people I was surrounding myself with were very petty, right? And that's not even a criticism of them because I was there too. But when I shifted and I kind of was more intentional about the people I was hanging out with, and also the types of events I was doing, right? I'm on a hike, or we're going out to a nice dinner without alcohol, you're going to have a more meaningful conversation than like drunken nonsense, right? All of those things helped my burnout, right? They seem not related. We have a tendency to be like, okay, but that's your career and this is your family and that's your social life. But they're all Venn diagrammed, right?
Yep.
If I'm burnout at work and then the only thing I'm doing is hanging out with gossipy people and drinking, of course I'm not rested and gonna handle my job well. When I've learned how to meditate, move my body, surround myself with inspirational, supportive people who can call me out on my BS, right? That helps my career.
Absolutely. And it just goes to show, and I've heard this, with the guests that I've interviewed, and I've even said it, right? It's who you surround yourself with is going to determine, right? That old adage, right? If there's 5 alcoholics, I'm going to be the 6th. But if I'm hanging around 5 healthy people, I'm going to be the 6th. True. Right. And, and I think as we get older too, and you'll agree, is that I think I know for me, I'll just say for me that I need to really pick and choose who I hang out with as I get older. Right. So that, one, I can be the husband I need to be to my wife, right? The grandfather I need to be to my grandkids, the father I need to be to my children, and just be that person, that I expect myself to be around other people. But like you said, if I'm grinding all day long, and then like you said, the only relief I find is if I go to the local bar and I sit there till 2:00 in the morning, gossiping all day, right? One, I'm not getting healthy because I'm putting bad stuff in my body, right? Mm-hmm. Some people can do that, but I know I'm not one of those. And what I have found, like with you, is people that really care about their mental health and their physical well-being and the people they care for don't like doing that. Like they come to a point in their life where like, I don't like myself when I'm doing that, so I'm not going to do it anymore. Right. So, and everybody, this is not a plug and you should get sober and,
no, do you?
But right? Actually, they should understand that this is about you doing you, being the most authentic self. And like, I like what Allison said, right? But if you're doing good things, the better you become. But if you're doing stuff that is negative to your mental health and your physical health, it's just, you're going to be, at the end of the day, you're going to have no energy. Like for me, let's use me, for instance, my granddaughter comes up and says, "Hey, grandpa, let's go play." And I'm like, no, grandpa's too tired, right? I can't get up. They're going to just look at me and go, and that's not the legacy I want to leave. Right. Or the day will come when I'm like, okay, the Fearless Happiness podcast is no more because Max is burned out and he can't do this. Right. But I love doing this. I look forward to my guests every time I'm with a guest. So now that you're a parent, right? How does life look like to you as while you're doing this tough job? Like how, right? But they're 3 years old. So right now it's probably easy to go, I don't have to talk about, you know what I mean? Like I can separate this, but you know, they're going to get to an age and they're going to go, mommy, tell me about what you do. Right. And then when they start to know what you do, they're going to go, hey, what happened today, mom? Can you tell, you know, and I know most of the time you're like, no, I can't talk to you, but they're going to get curious. How are you going to handle that? Right. When that happens?
Yeah. Well, I'm lucky. I mean, I joke that I sold out, but that's not really true. I did not. But I moved from agency work to private practice. Right. So, you know, and that was a huge transition for me. So I still do work. I still work in sex and intimacy. I still work with trauma. I see the same types of clients, obviously in an extremely different scenario.
Right.
And for me, again, the pivot, right? It's like, okay, well, at 35, I pivoted and I went back to all this therapy work. I was back in agency. I was back working 80 hours a week. And then when my husband and I decided that we were going to go like on our family journey, right? And that I'm an old mom. I'm 43. My kid's 3 months old. Like I just had her. She, you know, like it took a long time for us to get there. Just because careers and stuff were happening. So now that I have her, I've had to pivot again and renegotiate my life, right? So it's like, okay, what has to give? Like, can I find a new way to look at the same thing that I love and find a different application for it, right? And in 2020, when COVID happened and we all moved virtually, I was like, this is the worst. No one can get good healthcare this way. And now I have fully swung the other direction. I don't think it's for everybody. I think there's plenty of spaces, clients, circumstances that it doesn't work. But for me, for as many people who I'm the wrong fit for because I'm virtual, there are plenty of people that, you know, just don't have the time or the means to get to a physical space. And like, I'm talking to them from the lunch break in their car because that's the only thing that they can do, right? Not driving.
Right.
So, yeah, I've restructured the way I work.
Right. And when COVID hit, you're right. Like, because I was an in-person meeting kind of guy, right? Like that's the only way I can connect, right? When they were telling me, well, we can't have meetings anymore, you're going to have to do them virtually. I was like, oh, this is going to be horrible. Right. And of course I was like, you know, the Mikey from the Life commercial, hey, he hates everything. Right. Like, and then first couple. Okay. And then I see where this is beneficial this is a win-win for everybody, right? Because if you can't get to a meeting, now there's really no excuse for you not to get to a meeting.
That's
right.
True.
If you don't want to be around people, okay, you can sit in the comfort of your home and still get the same recovery that you would get in a meeting. Right. And same with therapy. And I've done therapy virtually, and it's beneficial for me because I help take care of my mother-in-law, right, who's 93 with Alzheimer's. So it's a win-win, right? Because I can make her lunch and tell my therapist I'll be there and just give me 2 seconds. I'll be right there. They're like, okay. But that's just the shows your resilience, right? And what our world has come to is adapting and overcoming situations where we don't let it stop us, right? So that's right. You had a child, yes, late. Matter of fact, we just went to a baby shower this past weekend where the parents are in their 40s, early 50s, and are excited. I look at my wife, because I always say my kids, I go, I don't know if I can handle 3 more of mine anymore because, you know, I love spoiling the grandkids and I want to keep it that way. And but it's that saying, right? If life hands you lemons, make lemonade and make the best of it, right? Because whatever you believe in, if it's Buddha, God, or the universe or source, right? There's always, I think, a rhyme and reason to the things that it puts us through, or the universe, whatever you want to call it, right? To see how we respond, right? So I'm sure doing what you do, even virtually, like learning how to respond in a different way. And how has that been for you? Like when you're sitting across like the screens like we are, and someone just lays it all before you even say, hi, my name is, Allison, what? And they're just like, and you're like, oh, okay, Go ahead. I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a huge adjustment and a lot of learning curves. But I think whether we're talking about like a therapeutic space in the traditional sense of like therapist to client, or we're talking about meetings, it's like what are people really looking for in that space? It's like safety, right? They want someone that is actively engaging with them, is making eye contact, is listening, is empathetic, is non-judgmental, is objective. So, those, even though the skill itself is a bit different, right? I need to, I lose some of the behavioral cues, but I also gain some of like something that I would never have in real life or in person. Like I see my clients' pets, right? And I know that sounds silly, but like how someone, if their cat jumps on their lap, right? Suddenly there's like a new talking point. You see a different side of them, right?
Right.
Even the harshest person might be more, there's a softness that comes out. So it's like what we lose, we gain something else. And I think fundamentally, as long as you like, I just show up, I do therapy the way I'm talking to you right now, right? I'm not very clinical. And it's like people just need people. We need support. And yeah, you can gift that over a screen, believe it or not.
Absolutely.
In my humble opinion.
You know what? I'm with you 100% because I'm the same person in person or through the computer, right? I'm the same way. Like half the time I'm working with clients, they think I'm a homeboy or their pal, right? Because I don't use big clinical words where they go, "What did you just say?" I'll throw a couple F-bombs out there just to make them feel really comfortable. Yep. Like, just, I want you to be you, right? And I think that's the only way, as you know, we can get them to do that is if we're just being ourselves and not trying to be, right? And plus, I don't know half the big clinical words off the top of my head. My CRS is bad, right? So I'll remember it later, but I'm like, I'm just going to be their pal right now and let them be able to be heard, right? Because that's, like you said, the big thing is, if like I was working with you, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is like, she's going to want to be heard. So how do I do that? Whether it's from a computer screen or in person, right? And it's the eye contact and, the tone of voice and letting you know that this space is your space to do whatever you need to do. And I'm sure the vice versa, right? And and I knew that was going to be the case. Like when we first got on, I'm like, I'm going to like Allison because she's just so chill and she's just making this feel, and thank God my coughing went away because everybody, it was bad like a couple of days ago. And I'm thinking, okay, please, when I interview Allison, this has to stop, right? But it's always interesting, to talk with my fellow clinicians on how they do things, right? It's like we're people, so everybody's different. But I just love the approach from the most of the fellow clinicians that I've met, whether it's on here or in person or, at a whatever conference or whatever. I just love that the fact that we're just people trying to help other people heal from whatever trauma, right, that they've gone through. And that's why I like having a guest like you, right? So you can, share your voice on how you do things and, share where you've been and how it's turned you into the amazing human being that you are today. So people can see that she's human, just like me. Cool. I'm going to have to reach out. So, it makes it easier, I think. And I think you'll agree is when people can see us as just their fellow human being.
Yep,
right.
Absolutely.
Right. Cause I remember when I worked in mental health, right? They said, do not dress up.
Yeah.
Dress like you're going out to go, whatever, shorts, right? Yeah. Just no flip-flops, but you can wear shorts.
Right. Yeah. Right?
Because if they see you in a suit, they're going to think you're an authoritative person. Yeah. And they're not going to want to talk to you. But if they see you like dressed like them, pretty much, then they'll be like open, right? And that's why I just come on here. Like some people say, you got to get dressed up on your, I said, man, I'm just going to be me. They're going to understand this is who I am, whether it's my, only thing I don't do is wear a tank top when I'm doing my interviews. I just, I just don't, but I will wear t-shirts that say what, not really bad things, but we'll have punk rock stuff or whatever.
Love it.
But, so as you've gone through your career and made that pivot, I'm sure you've done small pivots throughout this whole time you've been doing this, because I think we find as helpers is sometimes we have no choice but to make a pivot because we're going down like a slippery slope or whatever. So how has that been for you? And let's talk about this. How important is your support system in the work that you do? I want my audience to understand, like, we're not superhumans, right? We have our days and we have our support systems. And how important is that to you?
Oh, I mean, phenomenally important. I had a client once. She was one of my favorite clients. I don't see her anymore, but I saw her for a very long time. And one of our termination sessions, she was like, you're the most chill, put together person I've ever met. And I burst out in laughing. And I was like, do you want to ask my partner that? Like, we're all just human beings. Like, I'm a hot mess half the time, right? Like, I'm doing the best I can. It's easy for me to show up this way. All of us are just human. So I just wanted to echo that for a minute. I'm not an expert in anyone's life, and I don't expect my therapist to be one either. But like, how big is my community? I'm a therapist who goes to therapy. I have a therapist. Like I said, I had an alcohol coach. I just really vibed with her, and I went from drinking recreationally to being alcohol free for almost 2 years now. And I have my community at my dance studio. I'm not a religious person, but I'm a spiritual person. So I go to a spiritual institute. Actually, they call it the Spiritual Institute, and do meditation circles. And I also think picking your partner is one of the biggest decisions we have in life. Like, a good partner will make or break you, right? A bad partner can destroy you.
Right.
And that is not to say that I have any type of a perfect marriage. We fight, we have all the problems that every couple has. But I think that, like, including him as part of my community is definitely, having someone who, with the pivots, will roll with me, right? There's no crazy thing that I've said yet in my now 14-year relationship where my now husband hasn't been like, okay, we'll figure that out. Right. And doesn't mean we're going to figure it out today, but you want to write a book? All right. You want to quit your 6-figure paying high up job and start over and go get an internship at Rikers Island and bartend happy hour? Like, all right, we'll figure that out. So I think that's important too, but it doesn't have to be your partner. Making sure you have people that support you and are like, looking out for you. It's phenomenally important.
Absolutely. Knowing people have your back, and like you said, writing a book or talk about the stuff that you've done outside of what you do that's helped shape who you are. Right. And with the support of your family, your husband and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, I have a million ideas that run through my head all the damn time. So I'm currently in pursuit of I'm writing a book. I have my own podcast called Becoming Unstoppable. So those are like my big passion projects. Like everyone else in the world these days, I, have an Instagram account that I actually care. I don't care a lot about it as in like how many followers I have or anything,
right.
But I do care about it that like it's a place that people can come to for,
right.
There's no way to have social media as therapy, but a place of encouragement and support.
Right.
I have a speaking career. I appear on a lot of podcasts and TV. I speak on things myself. So all of these things, right, collectively make me who I am, at least in my career space. But they're all little pieces of me. They all matter to me, right? So, I do all of that, and I love to dance. I love the animals. So, just showing up one day at a time, trying to figure this life out, I guess, is what I do on the side.
And that's it though, right? Having hobbies, or like you and I, our podcast, right? Which is what do you call that? I love, like, I'm passionate about it because I get to do it, if that makes sense, right? I've written a book too. Like, you got to have these things that mine's not a New York Times bestseller, but I can tell some of my friends, like, what book have you written? Like
exactly that.
But here's the thing is, like, I love my friends because they've all were like, some of them, like, I haven't seen for a long time. Like, I didn't know you wrote a book, like, we all thought you went to prison or died on us, right? Because your addiction. And I'm like, no, check it out. But those are the things I think all of us as human beings need to find, right? Whether it's a hobby, whether it's something you're very passionate about, right? Like I love doing this and interviewing, guests like Allison, everybody, because maybe it's selfish, but I always get a takeaway from it, right? I learn something new with every guest, and I always walk away with a new friend, and I get to learn about people, right, through
Beautiful.
the lens of Allison and her life and how she's helping people, and so now I get to ask you some of the questions I love, right? Because and some of it's a repeat from what you wrote when you came on here, but I love asking this so my audience can hear your answer. And that is, right. I wrote a book that's the same title as my podcast. So I'm going to start with fearless, right? What does fearless mean to you, Allison? And how does that show up in your life on a daily basis?
Oh my God. And can I tell you that I don't even remember what I answered. So I'm going to assume that this is my actual answer, but I'm going to go back and be like, is this how I answered it? What I would say is fearless is just showing up unapologetically. I love the word unapologetic, right? And so it's big things require fear, right? So I want to think of fearless in my head. It doesn't mean to actually be absent of fear. It just means that fear shouldn't get in your way, right? And like a mantra that I have to myself regularly is it's okay to do it scared. I remember my very first day walking into Rikers. It's literally an island. So you have to get a bus stop before you get to the jail system. And there's a very long bridge. And I was on the bridge and I was shaking, right? Like it's a new job. I'm having imposter syndrome. Also, I'm going into an actual like notoriously dangerous jail. So it's
right.
Physically dangerous. I'm working with all men. I'm a female. And I remember thinking to myself, this is the most scared that you're going to be, right? You're going to, at the end of this story, whatever day in the future that it's your last day at Rikers Island, you're going to look back in this moment and realize you've learned so much. Like right now, you're just walking into the unknown, right? It's the abyss. Right. You don't have a schema for this. You don't know what you're up against. It's okay to be scared right now. It's not okay to quit, right? And that to me is sort of like what fearless looks like.
Awesome. You hear that, everybody? It's not okay to quit. And it's funny when we go into new things like that when we find out what the biggest fear was, like you said, it was that ride across the bridge. It wasn't actually going into the jail and meeting with your clients, right? Or I just remember, like, I remember when I first got in trouble, right? And I was going to jail. I went to LA County and I heard horror stories, right? So I was scared to death, right? And I'm sitting there and, these two guys come up that were, Hispanic, and they're going to ask me like, hey, are you a Southsider? And I remember I answered with like, what's a Southsider? And they just looked at me. They actually calmed my fear because they just looked at me and almost wanted to laugh. Like, we're going to leave this poor guy alone. Like, just go rest. Like, you don't even know what we're talking about. I'm like, but when you said that, that's what made me think about now it's just, like you said, it's not the absence of fear. It's just doing it anyway. Yeah. Right. Because it's usually the fear of the unknown. And are we really going to be fearless? Probably not. Right. Because there's those two inherent fears that we have, right? The fear of falling and the fear of death. I think it is what they say. So, and I'm not even fear of death anymore. Right. Like if I died today, I'm like, hey, I just had an awesome podcast with Allison. God, here I come. Thank you very much for letting me have a great life. Right? Allison, I get to laugh and talk. And so that leads me to my next question is happiness. As you can see, I put a Y there. Yeah. Knowing I put a Y in happiness, what does that mean to you, Allison? And how does that show up in your life on a daily basis?
So I love to tell the story, but I was once counseling a kid and he was, I don't know, maybe 10. I think about this kid now. He's probably like 25. Like, where is this kid now? But he looked at me and he was like, what's the meaning of life? And I was like, whoa, okay, this is above my pay grade, little sir. I don't know what the meaning of life is, but I did the thing that therapists do and I redirected. And I was just like, I don't know. What's the meaning of life for you? And he was like, find things that make you smile, do more of those. Find the things that make you frown, try to do less of those. And I was like, oh my God, that's the most perfect response, right? I have 4 degrees in psychology. Couldn't come up with it. You nailed it, kid.
Right.
But that to me is what happiness is. It's like, you know what? It's not necessarily this like it's the overarching choices that you're making in your life. Are you doing things that consistently honor the things that make you smile versus leaning into the things that make you cry and the things that make you scared, right? So, that can be safety. I mean, it could be relationships, it can be careers, it could be hobbies, but just, find the things you smile, do more.
Right? Like totally with that, like out of the mouth of babes comes the truth, right? Like
you're just like, yes, the wisdom here.
Yeah.
Life will probably knock this out of you, but no, keep that forever.
Yeah, keep that in the forefront of your brain. It's going to serve you well, and I love it. I love it. So those are some awesome answers. And this has been like a very amazing time, my friend. I appreciate you being here.
Appreciate you.
But what I want to ask is, okay, I know you're in the working on the book. When is the projected publishing date for your book? And if people want to work with you, how do they get a hold of you, Allison?
Yeah, publishing date is we're 2025, so it's later to come. It's still being marinated. But where can they work with me? So I live on the internet. My Instagram handle is a note from your therapist. Same on TikTok. And I can't believe I say these things in my 40s. I'm like, find me on TikTok. And my website is a notefromyourtherapist.com. And so I do individual therapy in the state of New Jersey for trauma, sex and intimacy, and a bit of anxiety. And I do coaching for women, same website, a note from your therapist.
I love it. You heard that, everybody.
Yeah.
Don't pass up this opportunity to work with Allison.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I have a lot of free resources on there too. So check it out.
There you go. A lot of free. You can't beat that. But you're not quite off the hook just yet, right? Now I get to ask you my most favorite question I ask of all my guests, right? Not to be scared. I think you'll like it. And it goes like this. What is the one piece of advice, Allison, you could give my audience to help them grow as human beings and become better people?
Oh my God, that's a beautiful question. And I'm going to have a really simple answer. And it's just give yourself a break, right? We are really hard on ourselves. I often think if we could have a little ticker out of our brain, the things that we say to ourselves, I think if we brought to cognitive awareness, we would be shocked at how ugly we can be. Self-forgiveness, self-awareness, that is a bigger motivator than beating yourself up.
Wow. I love it. Perfect.
Yeah.
You heard it, everybody. And Allison, thank you for being here. This has been such a wonderful time. I know we could keep going for hours if, as helpers and where you've worked, where I work, and we could just have fun with this for days. But you heard her, everybody. If Allison made you smile, if she taught you something, if she made you think, and my famous, if she made you go, I like that. Please go to iTunes and leave a 5-star review so more people can find the podcast. And again, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in this world. This is Matt from the Fearless Happiness Podcast. Until next time.
Are you tired of being weighed down by life's traumas and struggles? Join the Fearless Happiness lifestyle and let us guide you toward a brighter future. Explore our past podcast episodes and get a copy of the Fearless Happiness book to ignite your inner strength. If you or someone you love is battling addiction or facing challenges related to unresolved trauma, know that we are here for you. Visit maxnijst.org, maxnijst.org, and take the first steps toward finding your fearless happiness. Thank you for listening. This has been a production of Fearless Happiness.